All right, thanks so much, Corinne. Thanks so much, everyone, for having me here. So my background is in health economics. This is part of a course that I'm teaching in decision analysis, usually to clinicians. So some of the examples will be a little bit more clinical than maybe what you have heard so far, but I hope, generally it's applicable to all different types of situations. All right, so let's get started with something totally non-clinical. If my screen's going to move, which it doesn't. All right, one example about a decision. You visit a friend in an area where parking is restricted to residents only. A nearby lot charges $3 a night. It's freezing cold, so it's not today, 30-something degrees outside. It's really, really cold, Toronto winter, and the lot is a few blocks away. Your friends suggest to park in the street, which they say they just come around, check only once every 10 days. And the fine for parking illegally is $20. What are you going to do? So I want you to think about it for a second, and then I want to see hands up for anyone who wants to park illegally. Who would park in a lot? Oh, that seems like pretty evenly distributed, maybe tiny bit more for parking in the lot. Anyone undecided still driving around the block? Okay, so 2 people are just still driving around the block. All right, so slight majority would park in the lot. So the way we think about it in terms of decision analysis is that we have some kind of question with different options of what you could do. So at least 2 options. Could be more than 2, but at least 2. And so we will have to make a decision. And so the way we draw it out, it's called a tree. That's why we call decision trees. And so this blue square is pretty standard in terms that that's where you have to make a decision. And so if you park in the lot, then you know what your outcome is. You pay exactly $3. If you're not going to park in the lot and you park illegally in the street, 2 things could happen. Either you get a ticket or you don't, but you don't know what exactly is going to happen, right? So you have a 10% chance that you get a ticket, then you pay $20, or a 90% chance that you're lucky, you're going to pay nothing at all. And so what we're trying to do is to figure out what is our expected value, right? So our expected value, again, for parking in the lot is $3. For parking illegally, we calculate our expected value same way you would calculate a weighted average. And so on average, we would expect to pay $2 if we park illegally. So if you're a rational decision maker, you would park illegally because you pay less money, right? So you're losing less. Of course, we've seen already that was about half of the people here who wanted to park illegally versus in the lot. And so even so, parking in the lot from this very basic example doesn't seem to make that much sense, right? But I'm sure that the people who picked parking in the lot have thought about all kind of other things, right? So it's not only about the $2 or $3 you pay. There are other things that you have considered in your decision making. There are values, there are things like you don't want to inconvenience the people who are supposed to park there, or whatever else. You don't want to get caught, you don't want to do anything illegally. So there are things that you value beyond that. And so those are the type of things that go into decisions. And as we move from the simple parking example to health and healthcare and public health, things become way more complex, right? So those are really big decisions. So there are some smaller ones, maybe drug A versus drug B. They're really big one, like we've just all been through a pandemic, and I'm looking at Irina because you're all doing the modeling and giving recommendations. So very, very big type of decisions with a lot of things that go into it. And so what I want to do today is basically talk a little bit about reasons why some decisions are difficult, and how decision analysis can help with that. What I want you to do is think about a recent decision that you had to make. Not any decision, but something that you were struggling with a little bit, where you had to think a little bit more about. That could be, I'm actually not sure if there are any clinicians here, but so could be clinical, could be public health, could be personal, could be something in your professional life, or whatever it is, doesn't matter. So I wanted you to take a couple of minutes and think about why that decision was difficult for you to make. And maybe I would kind of, turn around and talk with, or to the side and talk with the person next to you, or behind you, or in front of you. So make little groups and maybe share which decision you're thinking about and why that was difficult. All right, it seems like we may need to bring it back. It seemed like some groups were in deep discussions. I'm not sure about the decision or anything else, but and some were done. Is there any group that wants to share one example? I have to pick. Okay, thank you.
I think it's such a good example of I was in labor. I arrived at the hospital. I had a birth plan for all the decisions I thought I was going to have to make, and then I was faced with a choice that I didn't anticipate. The nurse offered me morphine. They could give me morphine, send me home, or I could stay. And I panicked. My midwife wasn't there. I had to make a decision on my own on the fly, and I still think about that decision whether I made the right one.
Why do you think it was so difficult to make that decision?
Because I didn't anticipate it. I hadn't talked it through with my midwife, and I was in freaking labor.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I totally get it. So yeah. All right. There are generally 7 reasons of why a decision is difficult, and you actually touched on a couple of them. So first is lack of knowledge, probably like, you hadn't considered it, so you hadn't read up on it, so you didn't really know about it. I'm sure there was some consideration of risk and uncertainty around the outcomes of your different options. Conflicting values may or may not have been part of your decision making. Heuristics and biases, then usually, especially in medicine, it's around how do we individualize risks and benefits, and I will also talk about it, how that's relevant in other fields as well. And then it's often difficult to synthesize all those different components, all the reasons of why a decision is difficult. And so what I want to do is kind of quickly go through some to all of those reasons. So lack of knowledge, I think, is really easy and straightforward, right? Ignorance, information overload, don't know what's going on. Personal ignorance, I skipped that lecture right now, but that's probably the easiest one to fix. There are complex medical, clinical health type of problems. There's a large body of literature. You can digest everything as easily. It's often difficult to stay up to date. Some diseases, if you're in the health space, present differently than what you have learned and maybe in med school. And they're emerging diseases where we don't really know anything much about it, right? So that's about uncertainty. The second thing I want to talk about is risk. And just have one example here around estimating absolute and relative risk. So that was a study where they asked primary care physicians in Canada around estimating the risk of coronary artery disease in a high-risk male patient, in an average 40-year-old Canadian man, and then also look at the relative risk. And they compared it to what's listed in the table as a computer estimate, which is basically based on, for those who know, a Framingham equation, so a large cohort of people that was studied over long periods of time to estimate that risk. And so we kind of then looked at, how off are the clinicians? And so what they found is that they were really off with the absolute risk, right? So more than double as high as what it actually is. More than twice as high, sorry. But they were actually really right on with the relative risks. And so this is one example of a study that looks at this. There are many studies that do this type of work. And so generally that's the finding that we humans are just really bad at estimating absolute risk. And so there are generally two problems with it. One is how to estimate it, and the second one, how to comprehend it. We tend to find it really, really hard to think about small risks especially. And we tend to overestimate very small risks, like dying, that's in a tornado or by lightning or something like that. And we usually underestimate risks that are greater. And it's hard for us to think probabilistically. That's true for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're a mathematician or a lay person. Yeah, I think that's all kind of, and that's hard for everyone, including policy decision makers. The third reason why decisions might be difficult is uncertainty. Uncertainty is different from a risk. Does anyone want to kind of think about or share with the group of why uncertainty is different, or what's different between uncertainty and risk? Anyone knows? Nobody ever thought about it? I want to say last time, but okay. You go ahead. No, I'm not sure. You were, okay. I wasn't sure you're kind of fixing your hair or. Not quite, but you're getting there. So if you think about, the easiest way I find is to explain it with a coin, right? So if you think about a risk, it basically means you know the state of the world. So you know the coin has a head and a tail. You actually also know the outcome, because you know that a fair coin, you should get head and tail, 50-50% chance, right? So equally likely to get each outcome. But the risky part is that you don't know whether you get head or tail. Now with uncertainty, we wouldn't even know whether it's 50-50. Maybe it's not a fair coin. Maybe it's 40% chance that you get head and 60% chance that you get tail. And if you expand it further to ignorance, then you may not even know what the two states of the world are. So those are the different concepts. And I think it's really important to kind of keep it apart a little bit. And so generally it's kind of, so how certain are you about your estimates? And studies found that experts often actually overestimate their certainty. So we kind of think we know, but we don't actually quite know. Another question, just to illustrate it. I'm stuck with winter today, I think, in this one. So each day, as you know, has a high and a low temperature. Today, it's the high measured without the humid index, sorry. So high 30, low 20 degrees Celsius. And so the question is, how many days per year is the low temperature below 0 degrees in Toronto, or equal 0 or equal to 0 degrees? I think you're all experts on that. As everyone from Toronto, or at least lived through one Toronto winter, or Ontario winter, let's say like that. Okay. So if I offer you a bet, the odds of me winning and you losing are a 9-1. That means you should only bet if you're 90% sure on that you will be winning. And so if you're betting on the number of days with the low temperature equal or below 0 in Toronto, I'm looking at the average over 30 years from 81 to 2010. So the bet on the table is that the temperature is equal or below 0 degrees Celsius in Toronto for 130 to 170 days, 1 year, in a year. So if the true value is within that range, you win $10, 10 imaginary dollars. If the true value is outside that range, I win the 10 imaginary dollars. Who of you would take the bet? Or you just say, no, I'm not going to do it? Nobody? I think some are tempted. Okay, two people who are interested in winning imaginary dollars. So are you betting that it's within the range or outside the range? Sorry? Yeah, so you're betting it's inside the range, right? Between 130 and 170. Maybe we'll let everyone participate. So hands up if you think it's within the range, within 130 to 170 days. And hands up if you think it's outside the range. Oh, there are way more people, wow. That's exactly it. So the true value was 101. So it was outside the range. So actually quite a few people got it right, which is amazing when we think experts are not that great. And don't even have the true values within the range. Okay, conflicting values. So next one up. Often values or how we value specific outcomes and things are different between people, between public and patients and decision makers. We often may not be able to even really characterize that very, very well. And so maybe things or statements like, I would rather fall and die at home than have to be admitted to a nursing home. In health, there's one major way of how we value health, and that's in terms of quality adjusted life years. So what that basically means is that 1 year of life in good health is not the same as 1 year of life in poor health. And so we're using something called the utility that measures our preference for a specific health state. So say, you'd rather be healthy than you would than sick. And so we value our health on a scale from 0 to 1. And that we can use to calculate quality adjusted life years. So here's one very basic example. So usually you would do kind of like a survey and ask people if you want to know how do people value living with osteoarthritis. That's what that example is taken from. Or similar, how do people value living with long COVID or, whatever it is, doesn't matter. And so we would ask patients or the public, how would you rate that particular health state between 0 and 1? Whereas 0 is might as well be death, and or 100 in this case is perfect health. And it could also, I should say, could be less than 0. There are health states where you feel that's worse than being dead. And so we could ask the patients or the public, we can rank our own health, or if we ask the public, we have like a description of that particular health state, like, you can't quite hike or walk the way you used to. And so there are all kind of different descriptions, and there are very different methods of how we can get this type of values. And so now once we have these utility values for a specific health state, you can map it all out, right? So you can start at day 0, and maybe this particular person is not in perfect health, like say today. Maybe, I have osteoarthritis, and so I'm at whatever, 0.7, something like this. Something happened, maybe I fall, I break my hip, so things are low, I'm in hospital, I recover it, I'm not gonna go quite back to where I was before. And then some other health event happened and my health deteriorates until I die. And so basically the area under that curve will be our quality adjusted life year. And so we can map out into the future of how a specific disease would impact our patients. And so that goes beyond just saying someone is a case, right? So if you think back, and I may use COVID a little bit as well. So we were mostly at that time, all we could kind of like measure was number of cases, number of hospitalizations, number of patients in ICU. But for each of those health states, we could also attach a utility and have a broader measure of health. And knowing now that there's some proportion of people who have long-term sequelae or consequences from the disease, we could actually also include that. And so some of our decisions may maybe be different, maybe not, right? So it kind of depends. But so a quality basically captures both dimensions in terms of quality of life, but also mortality, because you're losing full lives of health. And so it's useful to compare decisions in health because now we have the same outcome for different interventions. So if a decision maker had to decide whether to invest in a new vaccination program or in a new cancer drug, so we are no longer comparing number of cases with influenza or something to extending life by 3 months for a specific cancer, which is really hard to compare. So we turn it all into the same unit, and now we can actually make trade-offs and compare different interventions. The drawback is, and I put it in red there, is that equality is equality is equality. So that's the biggest criticism of the quality adjusted life years, because we don't care what your baseline was, we don't care who gets that quality. So there are equity considerations in there as well that can be addressed in other ways, but this is the major criticism of the quality. Okay, heuristics and biases. I think you're all familiar with that. Heuristics are generally rules of thumb, and we use them in situations where we need to make a judgment and a prediction. And it's basically shortcuts, right? So it's great if it works because it saves us a lot of time in making quick decisions and assessing situations. But the disadvantage of this is that it can lead to systematic errors in judgment, which we then call biases. And there are all kind of different ones. I think the one example I have here is representative heuristics. So for example, you could judge features that are representative of a specific condition or a specific characteristic to indicate membership in a specific group. So one example is that a person with a stethoscope walking around the hospital might be, is probably a healthcare worker, right? And it's accurate when the representativeness relates to likelihood, but it can also be a problem if we rely on it too much. So one example is a classical study done in 1945 in New York City, where children were evaluated for tonsillitis. And experts were asked to examine 389 children. And they recommended tonsillectomy for 174 of those 389, so 45% of the children. Then they had a second group of experts who examined the other 215 children, where the first group did not recommend tonsillectomy. And then the second group recommended tonsillectomy in 99 of those 215 children, or 46%. And then they had a third group that examined the 115 children that were basically twice already excluded, or where other experts had already said they don't need tonsillectomy. And again, 44% were recommended by the third group. So the problem here is that expectation that the group of children they were asked to examine would represent the overall population, which was not true. Individualizing risks and benefits. So individualizing information is hard, or can be very challenging in the clinical setting, but I'd say like this is true everywhere else too. So patients that clinicians see may not resemble the patients in the clinical trials. And even if they resemble the typical patient, individualized risk may still be important because of some specific characteristics. And this is also very similar to when you think about modeling, and the data that you work with, right? And so how it is appropriate for the question or the problem at hand and the decision you have to make. And I just listed a couple of different approaches of what you could do, like subgroup analysis using population-based data, the clinical prediction rules and judgment that's more relevant on the clinical side. But I think generally the kind of data analysis to think about what is the group that you're doing your analysis for and what the data that you're using. And as I said before, so last challenge really is synthesis of how do we bring all those bits and pieces together, from not knowing everything to risk and uncertainty and values. And so it's kind of makes your brain explode if you have a very complex problem. It's difficult for everyone, again, to synthesize that in your head from a cognitive, emotional, and value perspective. So if there are a difficult decision, we need tools that help us to kind of think through that. And that's where decision analysis is coming in. Any questions so far? No, quiet group. Okay. Difficult decisions that way. So decision analysis is a tool to help us with that and help us think through it. And the one thing I want you to take home from today is really that this is about trade-offs. It's about making decisions under uncertainty where you have to trade off different things. It's very common in clinical decision-making, but it's as common in policy decision-making in all kind of area, medicine and outside of health. Like, it doesn't really matter where you are. And so we already talked about the 7 reasons of why decisions are challenging or can be difficult. And then in terms of definition, decision analysis is a systematic, quantitative, and explicit approach to analyzing difficult decisions. It's based on expected utility theory. So remember in the parking example, when we kind of calculated our expected value, so that's where that comes from. And it's the only well-developed prescriptive framework for choice under uncertainty. So again, that's the take-home message from today, choice under uncertainty. It's very commonly used in health and medicine. So we use it in clinical decision-making at the individual level. It's used very often now or increasingly for guideline development, so kind of building this type of models. And it's been standard pretty much, I would say, in policy decision-making in health. So decision-making on drugs, on vaccines, technologies, other kind of programs. And for the most part, I would say now outside of the pandemic situation, it's in the context of economic evaluation. So where the decision maker considers different pieces of evidence when they come together and have their deliberation. Usually they review evidence on clinical effectiveness, safety, technical aspects of the intervention, economic evidence where they look at what's the burden of disease, what is the cost effectiveness of that intervention compared to what we currently have. Does it provide good value for money? What's the budget impact? And then there's a whole range of other consideration that's falling more into equity, ethics, legal, social, implementation type of questions. And so the part of the cost effectiveness piece, this is where decision analysis actually usually is done. So where we kind of map out the different options. So usually what are we doing now? And then maybe there is one new drug that is evaluated or one new vaccine, or maybe there are different options. And then we kind of map out basically and predict and forecast what will happen if we just keep going the same, or what if we were to use that new drug? How does it improve health? How much does it cost? Does it change things of how we implement it? Do we need to change maybe the flow of patients through a hospital because they will have a different type of care pathway? And so then we attach value, we value the outcomes, right? So we have health outcomes, we have cost outcomes, and then we bring it all back and calculate something called an incremental cost effectiveness ratio, or how much do we have to pay to gain 1 unit of improved health outcome, usually measured as a quality adjusted life year. And there are things that we are thinking about whether it's good value for money. And so that feeds into that decision-making process, and that's where this all comes together. And that's why it's used so heavily in that field. And if you want to go, you can go to the Canadian Agency of Drugs and Technology in Health. Like, there are all those reports, they all have this type of things. In Ontario, we have, for example, the Ontario Health Technology Advisory Committee. At the national level, other than CADIS, it's also NACI now increasingly doing this type of studies, National Advisory Committee for Immunization in Canada. Okay, so let's go back to the basics. So if you think back to the parking example, which is always a nice thing to think through because it's so simple, right? So you always have at least 2 different strategies. And then there are probabilities of events that can happen as you kind of move over time, like, that as you move through it. And then and then you have specific outcomes. And so we will need to value those outcomes. And usually it's health outcomes. And I said already, we would value them in terms of quality adjusted life years or and cost outcomes. Some, I'm not sure where the age threshold is for this one, but so some seem to be familiar with it. Okay, so instead of who wants to be a millionaire, the game today is who wants to be a decision maker. And for those who don't really know, so you usually have in this game, you know, one question after the other. The further along you get, the more money you can win. If you don't know the answer, you kind of lose not everything, but most of everything, depending on where you are. And there are what they call like 3 lifelines, which is either 50-50, like they take out 50 per half of the answers, or you can call a friend, or you can ask the audience. So I need someone to play. What's your name? Steven? Deepit? I need to know. Deepit. Okay, Deepit, thank you. Yay! Oh, you don't need to come up. You can stay there. It's okay. You can also come up, but I think it's easier for you there. It's going to take a long time until we get all the way to the end. And don't say anything, okay? Like until I ask you. And nobody else. Everyone's quiet unless asked. But all right. So who wants to be a decision maker? So you're on the very last question. The very, very last one, okay? So you can win, if you get that last question right, you can win $1 million. You already are at 500,000. If you get it wrong, you for sure get 32,000. And you have none of those 3 lifelines left, okay? How do we show this as a decision problem? I would hope it's I strongly think it's a decision problem for Deepit and everyone else. What are the options? You can speak now, yes.
Either you go for it or you don't, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you go for it or you don't. Oh, sorry, I should give you the question, no answer yet. So that's going to be the question. I'm German, I should have said that before. In Goethe's Faust, Mephistopheles first appears to the protagonist as which of the following? A, black dog, B, a great bird, C, fine mist, and D, a talking statue. So I want everyone to be off their internet, and it's good you moved to the front so I can at least see what you're doing. All right. So you said already you have basically 2 options, right? So you could guess or you take the money. So you have that decision to make. That's your decision note. If you take the money, you take the 500,000 you have won already. If you guess, there's a chance that you're right and win the 1 million. But if you get it wrong, you go back down to 32,000 and that's it. Okay? Everyone with me so far? Yeah. Straight, easy enough. So you have a chance note where there is a probability for one or the other outcome, and you don't know what's going to happen. So, do you have, what do you think is your probability of being right?
Well, I would say it's 32,000
No calculation, like the question about the character, sorry.
1 in 4.
This is the question, yeah. 1 in 4, so you said 1 in 4, right? So 25%, but 0.25. Of course, I had to prepare that without knowing how confident you would be. So I put 0.4 for the first, no, 0.6 actually higher. All right, 0.6. So if your probability of being right is 0.6, then the expected value of that part of your decision tree is 600,000, right? Easy math. If your probability of being right is 0.6, then your probability of being wrong has to be 0.4. So those are mutually exclusive. You can't be a little bit right and a little bit wrong. It's one or the other. And then you go down to 32,000. So your expected value for that part of that tree would be 12,800. And so overall, we add the two at 612,800. So if your probability of being right is 0.6, what should you do? Take the money or guess? You're a rational decision maker. You care about nothing else than what's written there. Everyone. So who will take the money? Who will guess? So there was still some who would take the money. That is, okay. So I mean, it's hard to, as a rational decision maker who doesn't care about anything else and you have no baseline, no whatever, so you should take the $612,800, right? I mean, you should guess, basically, not take it. You should guess. You may end up with 32,000 only. Okay. And so what you now could do is you could change that probability, right? From 0.6 to 0.4, 0.2, 0.8, whatever it is. And then you can basically graph your expected value for the different probabilities of being right, right? So if you take the money, you always get 500,000. If you guess, the more confident you are, or the higher your probability of guessing correctly is, the greater your expected value, and there'll be a point where the two cross, so you will have a threshold there. So basically, and that threshold in this case is 0.48. So if you're at least 0.48, if your probability of being correct is at least 0.48, you should guess. If it's smaller than that, you should just go and take the money. So you should just go and take the money and you're done. I won't let you go yet. Okay. So there was a mixed kind of reaction to which strategy you would choose. Similar to the parking example, right? And that has to do because with values, which we haven't included yet. We just measured an outcome, right? So we measured money, that's similar to in health, maybe numbers of cases, but we didn't attach a value to it. And your value will be different, you know, of gaining even 32,000 if your net worth is 5,000 or if your net worth is 500,000. So your strategy may depend on what you already have and then how you value that additional gain or loss. And in health, it's similar, right? So 6 months of extended life may mean a lot if your life expectancy is 1 year, may not mean as much if your life expectancy currently is 25 years. So it depends what the baseline is, and it depends, then that determines to some degree and all kind of other reasons of how we value specific outcomes. So we need to figure out our utilities, right? Another game. So assume your value of getting $1 million is 1, like the best, the top. And we assume that our utility of having or getting $0 is 0, right? So we gain no utility if we get nothing. Now, if I gave you a lottery where you had a 50% chance of winning $1 million, you get nothing if you lose. Or I give you a 400,000 imaginary dollar gift. Which option would you choose? So who would do the lottery? Anyone would do the lottery? Anyone would take the $400,000 gift? Anyone still figuring it out? So the way we did it, just to be sure, right? So the expected value of the lottery would be $500,000, 50% chance of winning 1 million, or the gift. So the lottery should actually be the better option, right? But many chose 400,000. And that's what people usually do. You would choose the sure thing, even though the expected value is lower, and that has to do with values. So figuring out what our utility is. So again, we have the money that you could win with each of the options. So we said that if we win $1 million, our utility is 1, so perfect. If we get 0, we get 0 utility out of it. We don't know how much we value the 400,000 yet. Now we have a probability of winning. We also have a 1 minus p probability of losing if we do the lottery. So now we already did basically what would you do if your probability is 0.5. Most of you chose the sure thing. What if I change that probability to 0.99? So your probability of winning is 0.99. So that means you would get 990,000 expected value, or the sure thing 400,000. Who would do the lottery? I don't even need to ask who will take the short thing, because, oh, there were still people, okay. But the majority was very clearly now doing the lottery. So something switched in your mind, right? So if you changed your mind, there must be a threshold between those two values. And that threshold is what your utility is going to be. So we can figure that out mathematically. It's very easy. So basically, what we do want to figure out is where we are indifferent between the lottery and the sure thing, where both of options are exactly the same to us in terms of expected value. So for the upper arm of our decision tree, basically, because the utility is 1, so p times that utility, so we value that outcome, will be p. For the lower arm, because the utility is 0, basically cancels out, so our overall calculation for the lottery arm would be p. We don't know what the utility for 400,000 is, right? But we need to figure out where those two are exactly the same. So we could play that game, and I just keep changing that probability. Say I start at maybe I put that back again. Say I start at 0.5, and I go to 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9. Usually we actually go back and forth. So I start at a lower, then I give you a high one, then a lower one, a higher one, lower. So until we kind of find that point where you can no longer make a decision between the two options. And at that point, it's your utility for that particular value. So in this case, the 400,000. So say if we did, go back and forth and you were indifferent at a probability of winning of 0.75, then that basically tells us that your utility of getting 400,000 is 0.75. And so we can repeat that several times and for different monetary values for the sure thing. And so we get utilities. And again, we can plot that now on a curve. So where we say, depending so we can look at how we value different amounts of dollars. And so of course it's increasing and from 0 to 1. So if we go back to the example now, we can change our tree. So we now no longer just talk about the monetary value, but actually the value or the utility that it gives us. And so we have the one we have now, if you get 32,000, we value that at 0.36. So I just made it up, but so, that's the utility of 0.36. If we get the 400,000, like the sure thing, take the money, we would value that with 0.81. So basically, I think it's totally also, right? It makes sense from if we get very little amount of money, we have a lower utility than if we get more money. And so we can again calculate our expected value. And so now we get a greater value if we take the money at a probability of being right of 0.6. So basically, if we looked at it before the first time and we only looked at the monetary amount, remember our threshold was 0.48, at which you would switch from taking the money to guessing. Now that we include how we value what we get out of it, that threshold moves to the right. which is very typical, right? So now we attach some value to it, and now our threshold is 0.7. So if your probability of guessing right is less than 0.7, you just want to take the money. If your probability of guessing correctly is 0.7 or greater, you guess. That would a rational decision maker be doing. All right, that brings us almost to the end. I think I almost rushed it through fast, but there might be a couple minutes for questions. All right, so, and you're not done yet, Deepa, don't worry. All right, I hope I have shown you some of the strengths of decision analysis, and that is that the trade-offs are made very explicit. It's all laid out. What's going to happen from the point of where you make a decision downstream. So all the downstream events are laid out. All the downstream events are valued in some way. And anyone can comment on that and criticize it, and you can change it. We didn't talk much about sensitivity analysis or anything like that yet, but generally you do your model, you populate your model, you parameterize it, you get a result, and then you do a whole range of sensitivity analysis, right? So what if I don't have a utility of 0.4, but maybe it's 0.3 or 0.6? What if that vaccination program doesn't cost 20 million, but 21 million? And so what if the probability of getting long COVID is not 0.1, but 0.12, or whatever it is. So you do this whole range of sensitivity analysis, and that's actually where not only the fun is for the analyst, but that's also what's actually most important, because we want to understand how that system works and what is important in that system, what is driving our decision, what's driving our conclusions, and how does this relate to what we know about that in the real world. So maybe you could say, well, we don't really know what are the probability of severe complication is 0.1 or 0.3. And maybe it doesn't make any difference, and nobody cares, But maybe you say like, well, I don't really know whether that probability of getting infected is 0.1 or 0.12. And maybe that makes all the difference. And then it's really important. So sometimes you have very small changes and you have a large impact on your findings. And sometimes there's a lot of uncertainty and it really matters. Sometimes there's a lot of uncertainty and it doesn't really matter for the final decision. Sometimes if there is a lot of uncertainty and it really matters, that also indicates usually of where you need to get more information, and it could inform like future studies and study design and so on. The other two things I think are pretty obvious. Obviously, you can look at multiple outcomes, and that's why it makes it so great in a way compared to any type of study you could run in real life, right? So it's not a randomized controlled trial of one drug versus the other, but you could also include other treatments that maybe weren't studied in that particular trial. And we can incorporate value. So we can go beyond a number of cases, number of deaths, number of something. We can at how do we value specific outcomes. Of course, there are weaknesses, and as I wasn't here earlier this morning, but I think you may have talked some of it already, maybe directly or indirectly, but there's always that feeling that models are black box models. Something goes in, something goes out. Nobody but the programmer knows what's going on. And why that might be to some degree true, I think it's actually mostly around communication, and that's why I'm referring to, I think, what you guys did earlier this morning. Because there are ways of communicating what all the kind of, or how I say, communicating confidence without needing to go into the math and all the technical details. So one way we often do that is by what we call validation of the models. And I'm not sure if you talked about it, but probably, right? So you kind of run your model and you report all the outcomes and you compare it to data from the real world, data we know. How does it compare? Is it totally off? Is it close enough? And so on. So there are ways of doing that. And the other thing that I find is usually when happens the prescriptive versus descriptive tension. I find it mostly happening to people kind of new to modeling, who embrace the modeling idea, and decision makers and modelers alike. And you're just so excited to see that model, and it's all kind of really cool. And you get the output, and you pick that one number, and like, yeah, that's it. So very prescriptive, and so that's what we should be doing. But again, like what I meant to say earlier already is that whole scenario, what if, uncertainty type of analysis that are actually really important. So it's not just about that one number that should determine everything. And so with this, purpose of decision analysis is to assist in the comprehension of the problem. So think back, difficult decisions, where it costs too many things to handle cognitively, and to give us insight into what variables or features of the problem should have a major impact on our decision. Now you're back on and you can play. Do you want to, I could give you another lifeline if you want to. You want to play or you want to ask the audience first? Okay, the audience. Okay, let's read the questions again. In Goethe's Faust, Mephistopheles first appears to the protagonist as which of the following? Who thinks it's the black dog? A, hand up. Not much support for the black dog. Great bird. Even fewer. Fine mist. Might be similar to the black dog or the talking statue. I think it's between black, was it black dog and great bird, I think was maybe.
Black dog and fine mist both had 5. Talking statue had 6. Some people raise their hands more than once.
And maybe they are biased in some way, you don't know.
Maybe I am too.
Maybe you are. No, the ones who know are not allowed to talk, yeah.
I am unsure about asking the audience if they take the limit.
Yeah, no!
No, because it's 5, 5, and 6. If I go with strictly that.
Well, you're clearly an excellent decision maker because that's what you should be doing. Yes. Does anyone wants to have a given answer? Okay, we're all divided, so I'll just give it to you then. It was the black dog. Oh, I would have known, and I just lost my $1 million. All right, so that's it. I think we're pretty much on time. I'm still hanging around for lunch. If you have any questions, anything, you know, thanks for listening. And yeah, I hope you have an amazing rest of the day. Thanks.